So hello, everybody, and greetings from wherever you're from. I'm Imari Ventura Roches. For those of you who don't know me, licensed speech language pathologist, educational administrator, and special needs parent coach. I am so thrilled, excited, and flattered today to have Kate Steele Danton on with us. She is a licensed professional counselor. And so Kate Steele Danton is a clinical licensed professional counselor with a master's of science in counseling. She has been providing cognitive behavioral therapy and educational services to individuals, families, and schools for more than a decade. Kate believes in helping people overcome obstacles and meet their goals. She is a mom of 5 children. That is like a professional mom for me, including a few with special needs. Her integrative and intuitive approach have provided parents of special needs children with confidential, solution-focused, cognitive behavioral counseling for non-clinical issues such as the stress and relationship issues that are often part of parenting special needs children. Kate, thank you so much for being here. This is
Oh,
awesome. And I'm
thank
so
you for
glad.
having me.
Absolutely. So, before we get into the questions and are really able to talk about thriving together, restoring intimacy, and staying emotionally connected in marriages of parents of special needs children, before we get into that, I just want to give some context of why I picked this. Um, in 2009, I had a really awesome opportunity to go to Ghana, West Africa. Yeah, and study cleft palate. And so I went with my grad program, and we were on the team with the surgeons, the orthodontists, and all of the orofacial professionals, everybody. It was great. And we went, my program went the same time every year. So the community, the villages, they knew the students are here, and people would walk like so far to get this checked out because cleft lip and palate can impact feeding, breathing. Anyway, I remember meeting this woman, and she was so frail and so thin. And it's really a culture that's collective. Like you have multi-generational families and people living side by side and together. And she was all alone. And we asked her, what happened? Where's your support system? Where's your husband, your family? And she said, I had the baby with a cleft lip and palate, and my husband said I was cursed, and he left me. And so that was really my first insight into how special needs impact the family unit and the marriage. So please enlighten us a little bit, give us some of your knowledge, and let's get into these questions.
Perfect.
So, Kate, what are some common challenges that couples face in their marriage when raising a child with special needs?
I think the biggest thing is just the stress. As a couple, any couple, even a couple that has never had children, that change of life, and someone has a child, a lot of couples struggle through that because it's very different to take and have to focus on one person to then have to now focus on another, and it is a split of attention and trying to figure out the best way to do that. And it's new. So people don't think of it, but it's a huge adjustment. So there's like some tests you can take on stress, and divorce is way up there. Moving is very high on a stress level, but you having a child is up there as well if you do points. So it's stress that a lot of couples struggle through anyway. Then when you add special needs, the problem is there's so many different views on how it should be handled. You mentioned like superstition, but there's also, do we keep this private? Am I embarrassed? Do I feel guilt over it? There's a lot of times guilt, even though that doesn't exactly maybe make sense to anyone that doesn't have a special needs child. And then people handle it differently. So just like a loss of job or another big event, only this one's not going away. So you have a special needs kid. Now you have the stress of having a child. You have the stress of that, trying to figure out how you individually and collectively want to deal with the knowledge that your child isn't going to be like whatever you imagined your family was going to be.
Mm,
So I think that's the biggest part is you imagined before you have a child, you imagine, like, whether it's we're going to go to the park, or they're going to play baseball, or they're going to, it depends on whoever, whatever it was, the childhood you wanted to provide for that child to make them happy is now not what you envisioned.
Right.
And there's not this collective group, I'm like my friend's child life. Like you can't get a lot of people that can relate with you. So I think it's very, very isolating anyway. And then there's the fact that it's just demanding. There's quite often providers and the schools, once they get school age, and even before that, sometimes through the identification process. So I just think that it's kind of never ending.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a forever stress. And it kind of actually reminds me of anytime you have a member that is doing something, whether it's police, whether it's like um, a job that is high risk on some level. Like there's a lot of jobs out there for couples that are high risk. And so I think special needs children, people don't realize that, but it's almost like having that consistent, unending stress.
Wow.
So you
Yeah.
have to find a new normal rather than think of it as getting, like, usually with stress, what we do is get through it, right? Like the fastest way through is to just do it. And special needs kids, it's not like that. It's like, what is my new normal? What is my world now going to look like?
Yeah.
And if you just address the stress, and then if there's siblings, there's also the concern of, as parents, how do I give the other kids what they need instead of just the child with special needs?
Right. Wow, you mentioned so many things. I mean, I guess
Sorry.
a lot of us are relieved that, I mean, in general, just being married, cohabitating, there's stress in that, and there's an adjustment period. But I think what you said, which has been repetitive here with us, is the adjusting expectations, right?
Absolutely.
And having a new perspective. Something that I like to say a lot, and I when I speak to parents, is that they have to celebrate abilities. And it
Absolutely.
really, yeah, it's the phrase that really motivates the shift in mindset, that we can't really operate in a deficit mindset, that my child doesn't have this, can't do this. It's really what they can do, and to celebrate all that and who they are holistically.
And I think also finding a community somewhere is necessary. So like, especially as a couple, okay, so you're going to have to find babysitters, right? So you need ones that can handle the special need. And then I think the other thing is you want to find other couples that also have a child with special needs.
Yeah.
Why? Because then you can laugh together, then you can handle things together. And I think that, you have to find, like you said, it is perspective. So I call it a new normal, but yeah, absolutely. A new perspective, and celebrating abilities. I love that. And filling out, like, who are we, and celebrating your own abilities. Like the fact that you manage to get, a child, maybe there's a child that has a lot of rigid thinking and they can't do rain, right? So if you manage to get that child through the rain to whatever they need to do, then you should be celebrating each other for accomplishing that. So, in fact, you actually have more places that you can appreciate each other and celebrate each other
Yeah.
if you allow yourself not to care about what I call the studio audience, right?
Yeah.
Like if you were sitting in a TV show, you're not worried about what everybody else thinks, but just realize that you've accomplished something, and your significant other has accomplished something.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so before I move on to the second question, I love that part about, because usually as new parents, we depend on our extended family, our nuclear family, our extended family. But you're saying we have to open that up even more, and gather some more people who are in the special needs community to really create, right? To like do Thanksgiving, but also have Friendsgiving with your special
Absolutely.
needs parents. Yeah. And bond. Great. So next, what advice do you give couples who feel emotionally and physically disconnected from each other because they're overwhelmed with caregiving responsibilities?
I think part of that is anybody that's had a new baby, knows that after you have a new baby, you're just excited to get to shower while someone else
Yeah.
watches the baby, right? Like that's an accomplishment.
Yeah.
And so again, I like what you said about controlling expectations. So I think it's also, you have to realize that marriages, coupling, cohabitating, all of that starts through a process. And the beginning of it is exciting and new and getting to know each other, right? And then after that, and the importance of that isn't actually that moment. It's the fact that later on, when it gets hard, you can go back and remember that you have that. So, if possible, like, especially now that we have social media, everything else, if you have like Facebook reminders of a great event when you met, like you need to allow yourself a little bit of grace and ability to remember yourself pre-child
Yeah.
and as a couple, and therefore see how that translates now into the way you assist each other.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes, like, if you have to have a day where, you know what, not much happens other than, if you don't get everything on Thanksgiving done perfectly, but you know what, somebody laughed. Like, I think that's one of those things that you need, or you get a memory and say, oh my goodness, remember that Thanksgiving that, your mom came over and, we did such as, like, it allows you to reconnect by just dreaming and remembering what it was that got you there in the first place. Because you're
Yeah.
not, I think sometimes we think we have to do these elaborate things. And I always laugh because if you really think about it, people try to do in couples, like, oh, they try to do these, you know, I've heard of all these people that, whether it's engagements or Valentine's or even Thanksgiving, they do these elaborate things with the intent of them being, dream worthy, and they're a bomb. But
Yeah.
then the times that are most memorable aren't planned,
Yeah.
right? And what they are is they're being still long enough to see each other.
Yeah.
And when you're stressed, maybe saying, like, you know what, here, watch a show for 30 minutes, to your special needs kid or whatever. I'm going to take a minute.
Yeah.
And maybe what you need to do is figure out what your sort of your peace moment is,
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
so that it's quality over quantity for time.
Yeah. I think that's really good. And so it almost seems like the stress and the overwhelming feelings because of the responsibility between the couples is to be expected. But if they step back and look at the relationship as a whole, um, in doing that, there's a chance to reconnect, right? And to reminisce and to talk about the good times. But it's important to remember that this is your partner for the long run, right? At least we hope so.
Yes. and
Yeah,
and honestly, like, it is a, like I said, was saying before, I always try to say it's a new normal.
yeah,
Change the way you think about it. And I like what you said, manage expectations. I'll completely steal that in my
yeah,
practice. um but yes, I think you need to, as a couple, say, like, look, we're amazing.
yeah,
Like, not everybody could do this.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, encouraging one another throughout every step is so important. Yeah, great. That's wonderful. And so, Kate, what are some signs that a couple might benefit from seeking help to address their relationship challenges?
So, you brought up your situation in Guana. I have found that, yeah, I have found that usually couples don't seek counseling
Yeah.
until they're pretty far gone into the process. And, they're close to the end. And that's unfortunate because sometimes it's savable, but sometimes now there's all this built up resentment, and
Mm,
they, or worse, sometimes people, look elsewhere.
mm,
So I do think before you make a choice that is kind of undoable, like, if you are even thinking about being unfaithful, that is the time to book an appointment.
right.
because you can't undo that. You can't go back on that. Not that you can't still save the marriage or the relationship, but you can't undo that choice.
Yeah,
And if you're thinking that way, then something needs to be fixed.
Right.
And at that point, there's something more there. And if you could figure it out, you would, because it's not, nobody sits around saying, I want to go out and cheat, or I want to be out of this, or I want to yell at you, or so I think anytime we get to those areas where we feel like we aren't treating the other person the way we want to be treated,
Yeah.
if we are thinking about leaving, if we are thinking bad things about them, So I think it's to be expected not to feel as romantic at times. Anyone that's been in a long-term relationship knows that there are times that you're way high and times that are kind of low, and it ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
It does
Right.
that with children too. Nobody tells you it's going to do that with children, right? You
Right.
think they're gonna come out of you and you're gonna adore every second of them like a commercial. No one tells you there's times you're like, you're driving me crazy. And then there's other times you're like, oh my God, you're the cutest thing. So I think relationships ebb and flow as well.
Right.
And the time to seek help outside is when you can't ride those waves.
Right.
When you can't reminisce or find your peace,
Mm,
and
yeah.
you're no longer working as a team.
Right.
That happens too a lot with special needs kids. You'll have a primary caregiver that kind of like had a couple, and really realistically, the dad would do everything. So the child homeschooled, they did park dates, so that child and that father and the child got very attached.
Yeah.
And so it just became where the mom was not just the breadwinner, but she basically didn't have a relationship with the child or the other. And there was a lot of stress because of the fact that that child didn't want to really share the father with
Mm,
mom
sure.
out of an attachment. And so at that point, that's kind of nuanced and complicated. And at that point, professional help is probably needed because you have a lot of feelings.
Yeah.
Anytime it's big feelings, right? Like, so the father was feeling a lot of guilt, but
Sure.
also wanted to care for that child. And then the mother, of course, was feeling very isolated.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's a difficult one, but I love the anecdotes because it really brings life to this situation and the reality of what it is for couples to parent children with special needs. Kate, do you have any success stories to share with us about, couples who are really struggling and were able to get the help they need, shift their perspective, shift their mindsets, embrace the new normal, and really overcome and maybe even get closer than they were before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to tell you about something that's it's a little taboo, but I think it's worth mentioning because this couple came out of it so beautifully. So I had a couple. It was actually a Marine and his wife, and the Marine had been deployed a lot and was used to that constant like like adrenaline rush, right? And they came in and they thought it was done. They thought they were over because he had gotten to a point that he was watching pornography, and she was taking care of the special needs kid and had to when he was gone. So she felt like she was unattractive and he didn't like her anymore. Turns out that when they came in, sat, talked about it, and he felt he could talk and she could control her emotions because someone was watching, and because she felt safe and with me. What we found is that was just a replacement for the adrenaline. There was no interest in that. So all we did is just shift what he did.
Yeah.
So he started doing video games, which it seems like the craziest thing ever. But then the special needs child, they didn't realize actually was good at video games and enjoyed video games. So as a very odd, like, like as we just brainstormed and tried different things, and I think just someone else that wasn't connected and therefore not emotional about it, and the
Right.
fact she was able to feel validated, and she wouldn't have believed him if he said that doesn't mean anything. But
Right.
saying that in front of a therapist, then she's like, oh, he really means that. Like he's not going to tell her that if it's not
Right.
true. So then they were able to, and then she realized how much he was into her. So they were able to really explore their intimacy
Yeah.
Well, then he took a replacement for the thing that she found offensive that actually connected to the child. So to me, that's a success story. And I think that's what people don't realize too is a lot of times we assume people do things they do because of why we would do it,
Mm,
right? Like, so you have to realize that everybody has very different backgrounds, even if you came from the same place,
right.
um, and different perspectives, and they see things differently, and they use different words.
Yes. Right.
Like,
Right. So I think that's such a beautiful example because they didn't break up.
no,
And it was just, I mean, the communication was key there, and they were open to adjusting, shifting, trying new things, and really, talking to you as an objective third party and letting you help.
and they were real funny because later, like, they would do like after they kind of figured it out, they still came every 2 weeks, I think, just because it made them feel better to, like, do a check-in. And it became a joke apparently in the house, right? Like like, do you need some TV time? Like as a joke. And it was shocking to me that they could joke about it because it had been such a big deal in their marriage.
Right.
To think that they got to a place where it could be a joke
Right.
is
Right.
hard to even imagine when you're in the midst of something so close to breaking up your marriage.
Yeah. So scary.
And I think people don't realize that relationships are just fragile.
Yeah.
They are so, so fragile. And we think they're not because they're so real.
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I just love this topic. And I'm glad we're ending on that note. Relationships are so fragile because I would say, I mean, I've been married now almost a decade, two kids, and I would say that young married people, young families need a lot of support. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then when the child is neurodivergent, they need even more. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I'm so glad to bring up this topic around the holidays. I don't see very many people, really talk about the marriage, the intimacy between because I mean, that's the core of it, the parents, right? And their relationship. And you've just given us such wonderful insights and recommendations for couples. I love it. If people want to get in touch with you, is there any way that they can? Because I know that you're licensed in just a couple of states, but if anybody wants to know who you are, I know you've got a website.
Yes, I do have a website. The booking I have is down right now.
Yeah,
But I can be sent an email
yeah,
and schedule that way. So yes, I'm licensed in Texas, and I'm in California and Nevada, of all places I know.
yeah,
And then in Massachusetts, I can do some educational things, but I don't do cognitive therapy there.
right,
And so, but it's where the client is, not where I am. And some states don't care
right,
which it depends on the state. But yes, I see clients and I can see clients virtually. I can see clients as couples. I can see clients individually. I think sometimes with intimacy issues, seeing them both ways. I think, reach out to me. I have a website, I have a Facebook page, I have email, and I
yeah,
think you all of that. So, and I
yeah.
appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put your information in the post. This was great. Thank you so much for enlightening us, helping us to get closer in our inner healing goals, and really bringing light to the special needs community in every family. Thank you so much. This has been
Thank
wonderful.
you. Great to see you.
Thank
All
you.
right,
Take
take
care.
care. Happy holidays.
Thank you. You too.